After the wedding, we'll help Mom simplify everything.
You already decided that for me?
Don't open this where they can see you.
What is it?
The reason you need to leave now.
My house.
Mom?
I thought I was attending my son's engagement party. I wore my best navy dress. I brought a gift wrapped in silver paper. I smiled like a proud mother should. Then Olivia's father stepped beside me. He pressed a sealed envelope into my hand and whispered, "Patricia, don't open this where they can see you." My heart stopped. Across the room, my son Ethan was laughing with the woman he planned to marry. But when I opened that envelope in the restroom hallway, I learned the truth. This wasn't just an engagement party. It was a setup, and my own son had signed his name to my betrayal. If you've ever been hurt by family and still had to stand tall, please subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in my place. My name is Patricia Johnson. I'm 68 years old. For 40 years, I taught English at a public high school just outside Savannah, Georgia. Most people think teachers spend their careers grading papers and reminding teenagers to read classic novels. They're not entirely wrong, but what they don't see are the evenings spent comforting students who had nowhere else to turn. The lunches quietly paid for, the winter coats left anonymously in lockers, the graduation speeches delivered through tears because some of those children beat impossible odds just to reach that stage. Teaching wasn't simply my profession, it became my way of believing the world could still be kind. Unfortunately, kindness doesn't always protect your own home. I became a widow when I was 36. My husband David Johnson suffered a fatal heart attack while driving home from work. One ordinary Tuesday afternoon, one phone call, one knock on my front door. Everything changed in less than 10 minutes. Ethan was only 6 years old. He didn't understand why everyone suddenly spoke in whispers, or why strangers kept bringing casseroles to our house, or why his father never came home. I still remember him standing beside David's casket. He tugged on my sleeve. "Mom, when does Dad wake up?" No mother is ever prepared for that question. I wasn't. I knelt beside him, held him tighter than I ever had before, and lied through tears. I told him his father would always be watching over us, that we would be okay. At that moment, I made myself a promise. No matter what it cost me, Ethan would never feel like he had less, because he grew up without a father. I kept that promise, sometimes at a painful price. I taught during the day, tutored students after school, worked summer classes whenever they were offered. There were years I barely bought myself new clothes. Years when every extra dollar went into Ethan's future. When he wanted to play baseball, I found the money. When he needed braces, I found the money. When college acceptance letters arrived, I found the money again. I refinanced the house David and I had worked so hard to buy. Not because anyone forced me, because I believed in my son. I believed education could open every door. Watching Ethan graduate from the University of Georgia remains one of the happiest memories of my life. He searched the crowd before the ceremony. When he found me, he smiled. Not the polite smile adults learn to wear, the genuine one. The same smile he'd had as a little boy. After graduation, he hugged me so tightly I could hardly breathe. He whispered into my ear, "We did it, Mom." Not I. We. That single word made every sacrifice worthwhile. For years afterward, we stayed close. Every Sunday afternoon, Ethan called. Sometimes the conversations lasted 10 minutes. Sometimes an hour. He'd ask for my chicken pot pie recipe. He'd complain about difficult clients. He'd tell me about promotions. I'd tell him about retirement, books I was reading, flowers blooming in my garden, neighbors I'd bumped into at church. Nothing extraordinary, just ordinary life. And somehow, those ordinary conversations became extraordinary because we shared them. When Ethan bought his first condominium in Atlanta, he hesitated. Housing prices had climbed. He didn't have enough for the down payment. I never told him this. But I emptied nearly every dollar from my savings account. Money David and I had planned to use traveling after retirement. I transferred it without hesitation. Ethan cried. He insisted he'd repay every cent. I laughed. What are mothers for? He hugged me again. Back then, love still felt uncomplicated. Everything began changing about 3 years ago. It started after Ethan met Olivia Carter. The first time I met her, she was graceful, beautiful, confident. She brought flowers to my home, complimented my cooking, asked thoughtful questions about teaching. I genuinely liked her. I remember driving home afterward thinking Ethan had found someone wonderful. Slowly, tiny things began changing. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, just enough to make me wonder if I was imagining them. Sunday phone calls became every other week, then once a month, eventually, only when Ethan needed something. He always blamed work, long hours, business travel, client dinners, reasonable explanations. At least they sounded reasonable. Olivia always remained perfectly polite. She never raised her voice, never insulted me, never openly excluded me. Instead, she mastered something much more subtle: distance. If Ethan and I were talking, she'd suddenly need him. If I invited them to dinner, she'd already have other plans. Holiday schedules became complicated. Birthdays became rushed. Family traditions quietly disappeared. Each change seemed too small to question. But together, they slowly built a wall between my son and me. I tried not to complain. I told myself this was simply adulthood. Children build lives. Parents step back. That's how it's supposed to be. Right. Then little comments started slipping through. One afternoon, Olivia looked around my living room. She smiled politely. "You've done such a nice job keeping up this house." Keeping up, the words lingered. Not loving, not enjoying, keeping up, as though maintaining my own home at 68 deserved applause. Another time, Ethan mentioned retirement communities. Not because I needed one, just because they're really beautiful these days. I laughed it off. So are beach resorts. He laughed too, but something about his expression felt rehearsed, almost cautious. Looking back now, I realized those conversations weren't random. They were testing the ground, seeing how I'd respond. I simply didn't recognize it then, because mothers rarely expect danger from their own children. A few weeks later, the engagement invitation arrived. Heavy, cream-colored paper, embossed gold lettering, elegant, expensive. It invited me to a private celebration hosted by Olivia's parents at their country club outside Atlanta. I held that invitation for several minutes, smiling, praying silently that maybe, just maybe, this engagement would bring Ethan back to the family we'd once been. I wanted the evening to be perfect. I bought a navy blue dress, simple, classic. David always loved that color on me. I even wore the pearl necklace he'd given me on our 20th anniversary. Before leaving home, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. For just a second, I imagined David standing behind me, straightening my collar, smiling the way he always had before important occasions. "I wish you were here," I whispered to the empty room. Then I picked up the wrapped engagement gift, locked my front door, and drove toward the celebration, completely unaware that before the night was over, everything I believed about my son would begin to fall apart. The Carter Country Club sat on a hill overlooking a quiet lake just north of Atlanta. It looked more like a luxury resort than a place for an engagement party. White columns framed the entrance. Fresh hydrangeas lined the stone walkway. A valet greeted every guest by name. I handed over my keys and suddenly felt self-conscious about my 10-year-old sedan. Not because anyone had said anything, because almost every other vehicle in the Circle Drive was a luxury SUV or imported sports car. I reminded myself why I was there. Not to impress strangers, to celebrate my son. I carried the silver-wrapped gift inside. Soft piano music floated through the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of tiny lights across polished marble floors. Servers walked gracefully between guests carrying champagne flutes and elegant hors d'oeuvres. Everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. I spotted Ethan near the center of the room. He was wearing a charcoal suit I'd never seen before. He looked handsome, confident, successful. For a brief moment, I didn't see the grown man. I saw the little boy who used to run into my arms after Little League games. He noticed me. His smile appeared instantly. "Mom!" He walked over and hugged me. It wasn't cold, but it wasn't the warm embrace I remembered either. It lasted barely 2 seconds before someone called his name. "Congratulations, Ethan." He stepped away. "Oh, I'm so glad you made it. I wouldn't have missed this. I'm going to come back and talk to you in just a minute." He squeezed my shoulder, then disappeared into another circle of guests. That minute never came. Instead, I stood near one of the tall windows watching conversation after conversation pull him farther away. I tried not to take it personally. He was the groom-to-be. Everyone wanted his attention. That was understandable. A cheerful voice interrupted my thoughts. "You must be Patricia." I turned. Olivia stood beside me wearing an elegant ivory dress. She looked radiant. She kissed my cheek. "I'm so happy you could come." "So am I. You look wonderful." "Thank you, sweetheart. You look beautiful." Her smile remained flawless, practiced, almost effortless. "I've been meaning to introduce you to some of my parents' friends." "That would be lovely." She guided me toward a small group. "This is Patricia, Ethan's mom." Just that. Not the woman who raised him. Not the teacher who put him through college. Not even by my last name. Simply Ethan's mom. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Before I could finish answering one question, Olivia gently touched my arm. "Excuse me, I need to check on something." She disappeared, no introductions, no invitation to stay with the group. Within seconds, the others politely drifted back into conversations among themselves. I found myself standing alone again. I smiled anyway. Perhaps I was reading too much into it. A server offered champagne. I accepted a glass, mostly to have something to hold. As I wandered through the ballroom, small moments kept catching my attention. Not enough to create a scene, enough to create discomfort. Family photographs played across large digital screens. Engagement pictures, vacation pictures, holiday pictures. There were dozens. Olivia's parents, Olivia's relatives, friends, coworkers, even distant cousins. I watched nearly 20 photographs before realizing something. There wasn't a single picture of Ethan with me. Not one. There were childhood pictures, but every image featuring Ethan before adulthood had been carefully cropped. His father had been removed. So had I. The realization hit me slowly. Someone had intentionally selected these photographs. Someone had decided which family memories deserved to be displayed. I looked around the ballroom. No one else seemed to notice, or perhaps no one else knew enough to notice. A voice nearby caught my attention. "I hear they'll finally get her settled." I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. The words simply floated toward me. 2 women stood near the dessert table. One wore a diamond bracelet that sparkled every time she moved her hand. The other nodded sympathetically. "It'll be much easier once everything's organized." I know, Ethan's been carrying a lot. I suppose older people eventually need someone making decisions. They didn't mention my name, but they glanced in my direction, just briefly, then continued talking. A strange chill ran through me. What exactly had Ethan been telling people? Before I could think about it any longer, someone gently cleared his throat behind me. "Mrs. Johnson." I turned. A tall gentleman stood there wearing a dark navy suit, silver hair, calm eyes, perfect posture. I'd seen him earlier greeting guests near the entrance. Olivia's father, Richard Carter. "Please," I said with a polite smile. "Call me Patricia." He smiled faintly. "Then you'll have to call me Richard." We shook hands. His grip was firm, steady. Unlike the cheerful energy filling the ballroom, Richard seemed unusually serious. "I've wanted to meet you. I've heard wonderful things about you. Mostly from Olivia." He hesitated. "No." That single word surprised me. "Actually, I've learned quite a bit on my own." I wasn't sure what he meant. Before I could ask, someone approached him. "Richard, they're getting ready for photographs." "I'll be right there." He nodded politely, then looked back at me. "I hope we can speak again tonight." "I'd like that." He walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd. Something about the conversation lingered. Not what he had said, what he hadn't said. He looked concerned, almost distracted, as though he carried a burden no one else knew about. A few minutes later, everyone gathered near a decorated stage overlooking the lake. The engagement toast was about to begin. Guests laughed. Champagne glasses clinked together. Someone adjusted the microphone. Ethan stood beside Olivia with one arm around her waist. They looked like the perfect couple. I should have been happy. Instead, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing inside me. As everyone focused on the stage, I felt someone step quietly beside me. Richard. Again. He didn't look toward me. He kept his eyes on the crowd. His voice barely rose above a whisper. Patricia. Yes. Without warning, he slipped a sealed manila envelope into my hands. It happened so naturally that anyone watching would have assumed he was simply greeting me. The envelope was thick, heavier than ordinary papers. My fingers instinctively tightened around it. What is this? His jaw clenched. You need to read it. I frowned. Now? No. His answer came immediately. Not here. I stared at him. What are you talking about? He finally looked into my eyes. For the first time that evening, I saw something unmistakable. Fear. Not for himself, for me. Please, he said quietly, whatever happens, don't let Ethan see this first. The room suddenly felt colder. Music still played, people still laughed. Champagne glasses still sparkled beneath the chandeliers, yet everything around me seemed strangely distant. I looked down at the envelope. There was no name written on it, no label, no explanation, just a plain sealed envelope that somehow felt heavier than anything I'd ever held. I looked back toward the stage. Ethan was smiling. Olivia reached for his hand. The master of ceremonies picked up the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, applause erupted. Richard took one small step backward. I'll understand if you never forgive me for waiting this long. Before I could respond, he disappeared into the crowd. My pulse pounded in my ears. Every instinct told me to stay, to smile, to clap, to celebrate my son's future. But another instinct, one I couldn't explain, told me that if I ignored the warning in my hands, I might regret it for the rest of my life. Without saying a word to anyone, I quietly turned away from the ballroom, clutched the envelope against my chest, and walked toward the silent hallway leading to the ladies' restroom. Behind me, I heard the audience cheering as Ethan and Olivia stepped onto the stage. Ahead of me, only silence waited, along with whatever truth was hidden inside that envelope. The hallway outside the ballroom was almost silent. The music from the engagement party reached me only as a faint echo. Laughter, applause, the clinking of champagne glasses. It all sounded impossibly far away, as though I had already stepped out of one life and into another. I stopped outside the ladies' restroom. For a moment, I simply stared at the envelope in my hands. My fingers refused to move. Richard Carter wasn't the type of man who created drama for attention. Everything about him suggested discipline, control. The look in his eyes hadn't been theatrical. It had been desperate. I pushed open the restroom door. Thankfully, it was empty. Marble countertops stretched beneath oversized mirrors. Fresh white orchids decorated the vanity. The room smelled faintly of lavender. It was beautiful, peaceful, completely at odds with the storm building inside my chest. I locked myself into the largest stall, not because I was afraid someone would walk in, because suddenly I wanted walls around me, somewhere private enough to fall apart if I had to. I sat down on the closed toilet lid. The envelope rested on my lap. I whispered to myself, "This is ridiculous." Maybe Richard had uncovered some embarrassing secret about Olivia. Maybe she had debts. Maybe she'd lied about something in her past. Maybe he simply wanted to protect Ethan. That made far more sense than any terrible thought my imagination was creating. I slid one finger beneath the flap. The seal came apart easily. Inside were several folded documents. Not one, several. The first page immediately caught my attention. At the top in bold letters were the words, "Quitclaim deed." My heart skipped. I frowned. Why would Richard hand me property paperwork during an engagement party? I unfolded the document completely. The property address was mine. My house, The small brick home David and I had bought 34 years earlier. The same house where Ethan had taken his first steps. The same dining room where we celebrated birthdays. The same front porch where David proposed to me one rainy evening after work. I kept reading. According to the document, I had voluntarily transferred ownership of my home to Ethan Johnson, effective 6 weeks from now. I blinked, then looked again. No, that wasn't possible. I'd never seen this paperwork before. Then my eyes reached the signature line. My name, Patricia Johnson, signed in blue ink. I stopped breathing. It looked exactly like my signature. Every curve, every letter, even the tiny flourish beneath the J. For one terrifying second, when I questioned my own memory. Had I signed something? Had I forgotten? No, absolutely not. I had never signed away my home. Never. I flipped to the next page. A notarization certificate, official stamp, notary signature, witness signatures. Everything appeared legitimate. My hands began shaking. No. The word escaped before I realized I'd spoken aloud. I quickly covered my mouth. The restroom remained silent. No one had heard me. I forced myself to continue. The next document was even worse. A draft petition, prepared for probate court. The title froze the blood in my veins. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. My vision blurred. Guardian, conservator. For me. The document described me as an elderly woman showing signs of declining judgment, increasing forgetfulness, difficulty managing finances, emotional instability following widowhood. I stared at the words. Whoever had written them knew exactly how to make a healthy woman sound incapable. There were no outrageous lies, only ordinary moments twisted into evidence. Forgot where I parked once. Forgot a dentist appointment. Mentioned feeling lonely after retirement. Normal experiences, presented as proof that I could no longer manage my own life. I kept turning pages. Every new sheet made my stomach sink deeper. There were handwritten notes, timelines, lists. One page contained bullet points. Phase 1, encourage voluntary transfer. Phase 2, introduce assisted living discussion. Phase 3, file guardianship if resistance continues. Resistance. That word echoed in my head. Resistance. As though protecting my own home made me the problem. Another page listed estimated market value, current mortgage balance, insurance information, tax assessments. Someone had researched every financial detail of my life. Then I reached a photograph. It had been taken outside my own house. I recognized the angle immediately. The photographer had stood across the street. There I was, watering flowers on my front porch. The timestamp was from 3 weeks earlier. Another photograph. Me carrying groceries. Another. Me taking my trash bin to the curb. Another. Leaving church. Someone had been watching me. Not once. Repeatedly. I felt suddenly exposed, as though invisible eyes had followed me for weeks, maybe months. A folded yellow note slipped from between the papers. Unlike the official documents, this one was handwritten. Richard's handwriting. Neat. Precise. It read, Patricia, I am deeply sorry. I discovered these documents by accident while reviewing paperwork Olivia left in my home office. At first I believed she was being manipulated. I hired a private investigator because I refused to accuse my own daughter without proof. The investigation proved something far worse. I swallowed hard. My eyes continued moving. Your son is not an innocent victim. He participated willingly. The words seemed impossible. I read them again. Slower. Your son is not an innocent victim. My chest tightened. No, I whispered again. No, not Ethan. Richard's letter continued. The forged deed has not yet been filed. The guardianship petition has been prepared, but not submitted. Their plan appears to begin shortly after the wedding. I couldn't remain silent. I lowered the page. My hands were trembling so violently that the documents nearly slipped onto the floor. This couldn't be real. It simply couldn't. Ethan had cried when I helped him buy his first home. He had held my hand at David's funeral. He had called every Mother's Day. He had told people I was his hero. Children like that didn't forge their mother's signature. They didn't secretly prepare to take her home, did they? I closed my eyes. Immediately, memories flooded in. 6-year-old Ethan asleep on my shoulder after his first day of school. 10-year-old Ethan bringing me a handmade Mother's Day card that read, "You're my best friend." 17-year-old Ethan working weekends because he wanted to help pay bills. College graduation, first promotion, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Every memory collided violently with the papers sitting in my lap. They couldn't both be true. Either my memories had lied, or these documents had. Then another page caught my attention. Printed emails. One sentence had been highlighted in yellow. "Once Mom signs, we won't have to worry about the house anymore." Below it, another email. "If she refuses, the guardianship filing should move quickly. People already think she's slowing down." No names appeared in the body, but the email addresses did. One belonged to Ethan, the other, Olivia. I felt physically sick. A sharp wave of nausea forced me to lean forward. I pressed one hand against the cool marble wall beside the stall. Breathe. Just breathe. Outside the restroom door, applause erupted again. The engagement toast. It had started. Guests were celebrating the future. Meanwhile, I sat hidden inside a restroom reading evidence that my future had already been planned without my knowledge. I looked down one final time. At the very bottom of Richard's handwritten note were 2 more lines. "Do not confront them tonight. Call Michael Reynolds first thing tomorrow morning. He already knows everything." I folded the letter slowly. My tears finally came. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent tears running down my face. I wasn't crying because I might lose my house. A house could be protected. A lawsuit could be fought. Documents could be challenged. I was crying because for the first time in my life, I had to consider a possibility no mother ever wants to believe. Maybe the little boy I had sacrificed everything for had quietly become a man I no longer recognized. And somehow, that realization hurt far more than any piece of paper ever could. I don't know how long I stayed inside that restroom. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Long enough for the woman staring back at me in the mirror to become someone I barely recognized. My mascara had begun to smudge. My cheeks were pale. My hands still trembled. I turned on the cold water and splashed my face. Again and again. I couldn't walk back into that ballroom looking like I just watched my world collapse. Not yet. Not before I understood one thing. Were those documents real? Or had someone carefully manufactured them to destroy Ethan's engagement? Richard had no reason to lie, but a mother's heart doesn't surrender in a single moment. It bargains. It searches for another explanation. Maybe Ethan had signed something without reading it. Maybe Olivia had manipulated him. Maybe there was a misunderstanding hiding somewhere inside those pages. I grabbed a paper towel, dried my face, folded every document exactly as I'd found it, then slid them back into the envelope. When I opened the restroom door, the hallway was empty. The applause had ended. Voices drifted from the ballroom. Someone was laughing. Someone else was making another toast. Life had continued, while mine had stopped. I forced my feet forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. As I reached the ballroom entrance, I paused. From where I stood, I could see Ethan on stage. He had one arm wrapped around Olivia. His smile looked effortless. Guests watched them with admiration. They looked like the picture of happiness. If I hadn't opened that envelope, I would have believed it too. I slipped quietly into the back of the room. No one seemed to notice I had been gone, or if they did, they were too focused on the stage to care. And now, the master of ceremonies announced, "Our future bridegroom would like to say a few words." More applause. Ethan stepped toward the microphone. He looked relaxed, comfortable, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his carefully planned future had already begun to crack. He smiled warmly. "First, I want to thank everyone for being here tonight." His voice carried confidently across the ballroom. "This means more to Olivia and me than you'll ever know." People nodded. Several guests lifted their glasses. "I especially want to thank Olivia's parents." He turned toward Richard and Linda. "You've welcomed me into your family from the very beginning." Richard smiled politely. but it didn't reach his eyes. I noticed it immediately. Perhaps no one else did. Linda beamed proudly beside him. "You've shown me what generosity and success look like." More applause. I stood silently near the back wall, still clutching the envelope beneath my shawl. Then Ethan looked toward me. For just a second. There is someone else I should thank. My heart tightened. My mom. Several guests turned in my direction. I forced a smile. Everything inside me screamed not to, but I smiled anyway. She worked incredibly hard raising me. He paused. I wouldn't be standing here today without her. My eyes filled with tears, not because of gratitude, because I suddenly couldn't tell whether those words were sincere or part of a performance. Then came the sentence that changed everything, which is exactly why. Olivia reached for his hand. He smiled at her before continuing. "After the wedding, Olivia and I are excited to help Mom start the next chapter of her life." The room responded with warm applause. I couldn't. Ethan kept speaking. "She's done enough taking care of everyone else. Now it's our turn to take care of her." More applause. Someone near me whispered, "That's so sweet." Another guest smiled. "What a wonderful son." I looked around the ballroom. Every face reflected admiration, not suspicion, not concern, admiration. No one understood what those words actually meant. Only I did. Because 20 minutes earlier, I had read the plan. Phase 1. Encourage voluntary transfer. Phase 2. Introduce assisted living discussion. This wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't heartfelt. It was preparation. Public preparation. If anyone later questioned why I suddenly left my home, guests would remember this speech. They would remember Ethan lovingly announcing his desire to care for his aging mother. The story had already been planted, and everyone was applauding it. I felt my stomach twist. Ethan continued, "My mom deserves a simpler life. Simpler. There comes a point when maintaining a big house becomes overwhelming. Overwhelming. We've been talking about downsizing." My heart nearly stopped. That was a lie. We'd never discussed selling my house. Not once. We've already started looking at some wonderful communities closer to us. Communities? Not neighborhoods. Not homes. Communities. A prettier word for places they hoped I'd quietly disappear into. Several guests smiled at me. One older gentleman even raised his glass. "You've got a wonderful son, Patricia." I nodded automatically. My mouth refused to speak. Across the room, Richard's eyes found mine. His expression didn't say "I told you so." It said something far sadder. "I'm sorry." Olivia stepped beside Ethan at the microphone. She laughed softly. "I keep telling Ethan his mother is too independent." The audience chuckled. "But we're going to spoil her whether she likes it or not." More laughter. Then she added something that sent a chill through me. "We've even been telling her she shouldn't worry about managing everything herself anymore." Not one person questioned the statement. Why would they? It sounded caring, responsible, loving, unless you already knew what came next. I instinctively touched the envelope hidden beneath my arm. The forged deed, the guardianship papers, the surveillance photographs. Every piece fit together. They weren't trying to convince me. They were convincing everyone else. I remembered the women I'd overheard earlier. They'll finally get her settled. It'll be much easier once everything's organized. Now I understood. The story had already been circulating, little by little, conversation by conversation. They were building witnesses. Witnesses who would later tell a judge, Ethan always took wonderful care of his mother. Patricia seemed overwhelmed. They'd been discussing moving her somewhere safer. It was brilliant, terrifying, and unbelievably cruel. The speeches finally ended. Guests lined up to congratulate the happy couple. I stayed where I was, watching, listening, learning. A woman I had never met approached me. She smiled warmly. "You must be relieved." "I'm sorry." "Knowing your son is taking such good care of your future," I stared at her. She genuinely believed she was complimenting him. The words caught in my throat. "I'm very proud of him." It wasn't entirely a lie. I had been proud of him for most of his life. Another guest joined the conversation. "You'll love retirement living." Retirement living. Interesting, not assisted living. The wording had changed. Different versions of the same story. Someone else added, "My mother moved into one of those communities last year." It's such a burden lifted. Burden. That word lingered. Had I become one? Or had Ethan simply taught people to see me that way? I excused myself politely. "I need some fresh air." No one questioned it. Outside, the evening air felt cooler than before. The lake reflected thousands of tiny lights from the clubhouse. Everything looked peaceful, beautiful, normal. I walked slowly onto the stone terrace. For the first time all night, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Footsteps approached behind me. I didn't turn. I already knew who it was. Richard Carter stopped beside me. Neither of us spoke immediately. He looked out across the water. I was afraid he'd do exactly that. I finally looked at him. "You knew about the speech." Richard nodded once. I didn't know the exact words, but I knew the purpose. My voice barely came out. Everyone believed him. They were supposed to. Silence settled between us. I clutched the envelope tighter. I keep hoping there's another explanation. Richard closed his eyes for a brief moment. So did I. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. "I didn't want to ruin tonight any more than I already have." His voice sounded heavier than before. "But there's something else." He pulled out a small black flash drive. He placed it gently into my hand. "If the papers weren't enough..." He looked directly into my eyes. "This will remove every remaining doubt." For several seconds, I simply stared at the small black flash drive resting in my palm. It looked so ordinary, no larger than my thumb, yet somehow it felt heavier than the envelope Richard had given me earlier. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Richard glanced back toward the ballroom. The music had started again. Guests were dancing. Laughter drifted through the open doors. No one seemed to notice we were standing alone on the terrace. "It's a copy," he said. "A copy of what?" "My investigator's findings." The words settled over me like cold rain. "You hired a private investigator?" He nodded slowly. "I never wanted to." "Then why?" Richard let out a long breath. "Because Olivia is my daughter," I frowned. "I don't understand." His eyes remained fixed on the lake. "When Olivia was in college, she dated a young man for nearly 3 years. I liked him. He was hardworking, honest. They planned to get married. What happened?" Richard hesitated. "One afternoon, the young man's parents came to see me. They believed money had begun changing Olivia. They said she kept asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "How much property his parents owned, whether their wills had been updated, who would inherit their vacation home." I felt my stomach tighten. "They thought she was just curious." Richard gave a bitter smile. "So did I," he looked down. "I defended my daughter. I accused them of being unfair. Were they?" "They were." His answer surprised me. "They were unfair." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "They assumed greed before they had proof." He folded his arms. "The relationship ended for unrelated reasons." I eventually forgot the entire conversation. He paused. "Until 6 months ago. When Ethan proposed..." "Not exactly. When Olivia asked me a very strange question." "What question?" Richard's expression hardened. She wanted to know how difficult it was to prove an elderly person could no longer manage their own affairs. I stared at him. "What did you tell her?" I asked why she wanted to know. "And..." She laughed. "Said she was helping a friend." He shook his head. "I spent 32 years investigating financial fraud for the federal government. I learned something very early. When honest people ask legal questions, they usually explain why. When dishonest people ask, they explain as little as possible." A chill ran through me. "So you didn't believe her?" "No." "What did you do?" I waited. "For what?" "To see if it happened again." Apparently it had. Over the following months, Richard continued. Olivia kept bringing up similar topics: powers of attorney, living trusts, guardianships, estate transfers. Every conversation sounded hypothetical, but together, they painted a picture. He looked directly at me. "Then she mentioned you." My heart pounded. "What did she say?" That Ethan worried you were becoming forgetful? I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. I balance my own investments. I still drive. I volunteer twice a week. I've never even been diagnosed with memory problems. I know. Richard's voice remained calm, which is why I became suspicious. He reached into his jacket again. This time, he removed a folded notepad. I started writing down dates. Every unusual conversation, every legal question, every inconsistency. When the pattern became impossible to ignore, I hired someone. The investigator, Richard nodded. He specialized in financial exploitation involving older adults. My throat tightened. And he investigated me. No. He investigated Olivia and Ethan. That hurt more than I expected, because hearing my son's name spoken alongside words like investigation made everything feel horrifyingly real. Richard continued. The investigator followed only legal methods. Public records, business filings, license surveillance, document verification, no illegal recordings, no trespassing, nothing improper. What did he find? Richard was silent for several seconds. Finally, he answered. He found meetings between Ethan, Olivia, and a notary. I remembered the notarized deed. My pulse quickened. He found multiple visits to an estate planning office. He obtained copies of publicly filed business registrations. He confirmed Olivia contacted someone experienced in adult guardianship petitions. Every sentence felt like another stone placed upon my chest. But none of that proves Ethan intended to hurt me. Richard nodded. You're right. It didn't. So I kept hoping I was wrong. His voice cracked for the first time. I prayed I was wrong. I looked at him carefully. He wasn't simply exposing his daughter. He was grieving her. I finally confronted Olivia. What happened? She denied everything. Did she know about the investigator? No. I simply asked why she'd become so interested in elder law. And she became angry. Richard looked away. Not defensive. Angry. There is a difference. I understood exactly what he meant. People wrongly accused usually search for understanding. People protecting something often attack. 2 weeks later, Richard continued, she accidentally left her laptop at my house. My breathing stopped. The envelope. You found it. He nodded. She asked me to email her a document from her computer. When I opened the folder, I saw another folder. It wasn't hidden. It was simply labeled. He swallowed. Johnson. My last name. My knees suddenly felt weak. I wish I'd never opened it. Richard's voice had become almost a whisper. But once I did, I couldn't pretend I hadn't. What was inside? The documents you already have. The forged deed. The guardianship draft. Financial summaries. Photographs. Email exchanges. I closed my eyes. The envelope suddenly felt even heavier. I confronted Olivia immediately. What did she say? Richard laughed bitterly. At first she claimed Ethan created everything. I looked at him. Then, an hour later, she claimed Ethan knew nothing. So she changed her story. 3 times. In one conversation. He shook his head. That's when I knew both of them were lying. A silence settled between us. Finally, I asked the question that had haunted me since opening the envelope. Richard, he looked at me. Why didn't you tell Ethan you knew? Because I needed certainty. And now, I have it. He gently pointed toward the flash drive still resting in my hand. The investigator eventually obtained something. What? A meeting. What kind of meeting? Ethan. Olivia. The notary. I frowned. They were recorded. No. The office building's exterior security system. It records everyone entering and leaving. Timestamps. No sound. But enough. Enough for what? Enough to prove they met repeatedly. He paused. And then, what? The investigator interviewed someone. Who? The notary's former assistant. My heart pounded. What did she say? She resigned shortly afterward. Why? Because she believed documents were being prepared before signatures were ever obtained. I stared at him. She suspected fraud. Yes, but she couldn't prove it. So she left. The night air suddenly felt colder. Inside the ballroom, guests cheered as music changed to something upbeat. A photographer called everyone together for another picture. Life continued, as though nothing extraordinary was happening. Richard folded his hands behind his back. I've spent my career watching strangers destroy families. He looked toward Ethan through the ballroom windows. I never imagined I'd spend retirement watching my own. I could hear the pain in his voice. Not anger, pain. I keep asking myself one question, I admitted quietly. What question? Where did I lose my son? Richard didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his words were gentle. You may not have lost him all at once. I frowned. What do you mean? People rarely become someone else overnight. They change. One compromise. One justification. One selfish decision at a time, he sighed, until one day, they've traveled so far they no longer recognize themselves. Neither of us spoke. The lake reflected the lights from the clubhouse. Somewhere inside, Ethan was probably greeting more guests, smiling, laughing, accepting congratulations, completely unaware that two parents, one his mother, one his future father-in-law, were standing together outside mourning the man he used to be. Richard finally broke the silence. Tomorrow morning, call Michael Reynolds. You can trust him. He's one of the best estate attorneys in Georgia. I've already given him copies of everything. I looked down at the flash drive, then at the envelope, then back toward the ballroom. For the first time that night, I stopped asking whether the evidence was real. Instead, a far more frightening question entered my mind. If Ethan and Olivia had already prepared forged deeds, guardianship papers, and a public story portraying me as a confused elderly woman, how much further were they willing to go if I refused to cooperate? I left the engagement party without saying goodbye. Not because I was rude, because I no longer trusted myself to speak. One wrong word, one trembling sentence, one look at Ethan that lasted too long, and everything Richard had risked to give me could have fallen apart. So I did what mothers are trained to do. I smiled. I nodded. I thanked a few guests. I told Olivia I had a slight headache. She touched my arm with that polished sympathy of hers. Oh, Patricia, you poor thing. You really should rest more. Rest more. The words sounded harmless, but now I heard the knife beneath them. Ethan walked over when he saw me near the entrance. You're leaving already. His face looked concerned. Maybe it was real, maybe it wasn't. That was the cruelest part. I could no longer tell. I'm tired, sweetheart. He glanced at Olivia, then back at me. You sure you're okay to drive? There it was again, a simple question. A loving question. Except now every simple thing had another meaning. Yes, I said softly. I'm perfectly okay to drive. His smile tightened for half a second. Only half, but I saw it. Olivia stepped closer. We can have someone take you home if you need help. I looked at her perfect dress, her perfect hair, her perfect concern. No, thank you. My voice was calm, too calm. I've been taking myself home for a long time. For the first time that evening, Olivia's smile faltered, just slightly. Ethan leaned in and kissed my cheek. I'll call you tomorrow, I almost laughed, because suddenly I wondered whether tomorrow's call had already been written into their plan. Check on Mom, sound concerned, push paperwork gently, build the record. I hugged him back, not tightly, not coldly, just enough. Then I walked out into the night carrying a silver-wrapped engagement gift in one hand and evidence of betrayal in the other. The valet brought my car around. When I slid into the driver's seat, I locked the doors immediately. My hands gripped the steering wheel. For a full minute, I didn't move. I watched the country club through my windshield. Golden lights, elegant windows, music spilling into the darkness. Somewhere inside, my son was celebrating the future, a future that apparently required removing me from my own life. I placed the envelope and flash drive inside my purse. Then I drove home, slowly, carefully. Every mile felt longer than usual. My mind kept jumping backward. Ethan at 6 years old, Ethan at graduation, Ethan at my kitchen table asking for advice. Ethan standing on that stage talking about simplifying my life. By the time I reached Savannah, it was close to midnight. My house was dark except for the porch light I always left on. David installed that porch light himself. He used to say, "No matter how late you come home, you should never have to walk into darkness." I sat in the driveway staring at that light, and for the first time since he died, I felt angry at him. Not because he had left me, he hadn't chosen that, but because I wanted him there. I wanted him to stand in the doorway and tell me what to do. I wanted him to put one steady hand on my shoulder and say, "Patty, we'll handle this." But the house remained quiet. Only the porch light answered. I went inside, locked the door, then locked the deadbolt. Then after a moment, I checked both locks again. I had lived in that home for over 3 decades without feeling afraid. That night, every window looked different. Every shadow felt watched. The photographs in the hallway hurt the most. Ethan's kindergarten picture. Ethan holding a baseball bat almost bigger than his body. Ethan and David on a fishing trip. Ethan and me at his college graduation. A lifetime of love lined those walls, and somewhere inside that lifetime, something had gone wrong. I carried the envelope to the kitchen table, set it down, then made myself tea I never drank. The house felt too silent, so I did what I had always done when life became unbearable. I went to David's study. After he passed, I never changed that room much. His old oak desk remained beneath the window. His law books from night classes still sat on the shelves, even though he had never finished his degree. A framed photo of the two of us at Tybee Island stood beside a brass lamp. David had worked in insurance, but he had loved legal language, contracts, policies, fine print. He used to tell me, "The most dangerous promises are the ones people don't read carefully." I used to tease him about it. That night, I understood. Richard's final words kept echoing. David anticipated something like this. At first, I thought he meant generally, that David had been careful, responsible. But the more I sat in that study, the more I remembered something. A metal file box. David kept it in the bottom cabinet. He called it the boring box. Tax records, insurance papers, estate planning documents. I hadn't opened it in years. My knees creaked when I bent down. The cabinet door stuck at first, swollen from Georgia humidity. Then it popped open. The gray metal file box sat exactly where I remembered. Dust covered the lid. I lifted it onto the desk. The key was still taped beneath the drawer because David never trusted either of us to remember where we put things. I unlocked the box. Inside were folders labeled in his neat block handwriting. House, insurance, retirement, Ethan College, trust. I froze. Trust. I pulled out that folder first. Inside were legal papers I remembered signing after David's heart attack scare 2 years before he died. At the time, he told me it was basic estate planning. I had been busy with school. Ethan was little. Life was noisy. David had explained things, but I had only half listened. I trusted him. Now I read every page. Slowly, line by line. The house was not simply in my name. It was protected under the Johnson Family Living Trust. David and I had created it together. After his death, I became sole trustee. Ethan was listed as future beneficiary, but not owner, not decision maker, not anything until after my death. My breath caught when I reached a section titled Protection Against Coercion, Fraud, or Undue Influence. I read it once, then again. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. If any beneficiary attempted to pressure defraud, manipulate, or legally incapacitate the surviving trustee for financial gain, that beneficiary could be disqualified from receiving trust assets. My hands began to shake again, but this time, not from fear, from something else, recognition. David had built a locked door around me long before I knew anyone might try to break in. I kept reading. There was also a clause requiring 2 independent medical evaluations before any claim of incapacity could affect my authority. Not one doctor, not a relative's opinion, not a convenient petition, 2 independent physicians, chosen outside the family. Then I found an envelope tucked in the back of the folder. My name was written across it. Patty, if you ever need this, read it alone. My throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't open it. I pressed the envelope against my chest. David had been gone for 32 years, but suddenly he felt close enough to touch. Finally, I slid the letter out. The paper had yellowed slightly. His handwriting leaned to the right, just as it always had. My dearest Patty, if you are reading this, then something has happened that made you question whether love and protection can exist in the same room. They can. They must. I wiped my eyes. I know you trust people deeply. That is one of the reasons I fell in love with you. But I also know that grief, age, money, and family expectations can create pressures no one sees coming. I do not write this because I distrust our son. I write it because I trust human nature less than I trust your heart. A sob escaped me. Quiet, broken, but not weak. I kept reading. Ethan is our child and I love him. But no child should ever inherit the right to control a parent simply because time has passed. If he grows into an honorable man, these protections will never hurt him. If he does not, they may save you. I covered my mouth. The room blurred through tears. David had not accused Ethan. He had not predicted evil. He had simply understood something I had refused to understand. Love without boundaries can become a weapon in the wrong hands. At the bottom of the letter, he had written, "Do not confuse sacrifice with surrender. You are my wife before you are anyone's inheritance." I bowed my head over that desk and cried harder than I had cried in years. But those tears were different from the ones in the country club restroom. Those had been tears of betrayal. These were tears of being remembered, protected, loved, even from beyond the grave. When I finally lifted my head, the fear inside me had changed shape. It had not disappeared. But it no longer controlled the room. I gathered the trust documents, David's letter, Richard's envelope, the flash drive. I placed everything into a large folder and wrote one word across the front: truth. Then I sat back in David's chair. For the first time that night, I did not feel like a confused old woman being cornered. I felt like Patricia Johnson, widow, mother, teacher, homeowner, trustee. And no matter what Ethan and Olivia had planned, they had made one terrible mistake. They thought I was alone. They forgot David had loved me well enough to leave protection behind, and they forgot something else. A woman who has survived grief, poverty, widowhood, and decades of sacrifice does not break easily. She learns patience. She learns silence. And when the time comes, she learns exactly when to strike. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan standing on that stage. We're excited to help Mom start the next chapter of her life. The audience had applauded, not because they were cruel, because they believed him. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. By 6 o'clock the next morning, I was already sitting at my kitchen table. A cup of coffee had gone cold beside me. David's letter rested in front of me. I had read it 4 times before sunrise. Each time, one sentence echoed louder than the others. Do not confuse sacrifice with surrender. For 38 years, I had lived as Ethan's mother first. Today, for the first time, I needed to think like the trustee David had trusted me to be. At exactly 8 o'clock, I picked up my phone. Richard had been very specific. Call Michael Reynolds, no one else. I dialed the number he had written on the back of his note. The call was answered after the second ring. Reynolds and Associates. Good morning. My name is Patricia Johnson. There was the briefest pause. Then the receptionist spoke gently. Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Reynolds has been expecting your call. Expecting. Richard hadn't exaggerated. May I place you through? Yes, please. Only a few seconds later, another voice came on the line. Calm, confident. Mrs. Johnson, I'm Michael Reynolds. I'm very sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. His tone wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overly sympathetic. It sounded like someone who had already accepted the seriousness of the situation. Richard told you. He told me enough to convince me you deserved immediate legal protection. I swallowed. Are you available today? I've cleared my afternoon. I'd actually prefer to see you sooner." "So would I." He didn't hesitate. "Can you be in my office by 10? I'll leave right now. I'll have coffee waiting." Something about that simple sentence made me smile for the first time since the engagement party. Not because of the coffee, because someone believed me before asking me to prove myself. 2 hours later, I parked outside a modest brick office building in downtown Savannah. No towering glass skyscraper, no intimidating corporate entrance. Just a clean brass plaque that read, "Michael Reynolds, attorney at law." Inside, the receptionist greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Johnson, Mr. Reynolds is ready whenever you are." His office surprised me. Family photographs lined one bookshelf. Military service certificates hung beside law degrees. The room felt lived in, not staged. Michael stood as I entered. He looked to be in his mid-50s, gray beginning to show around his temples, wire-rimmed glasses, a firm handshake. "I'm glad you came." "So am I." He motioned toward a comfortable chair. Before either of us sat down, he quietly closed the office door. Then he locked it. Not dramatically, matter-of-factly. Privacy matters. I appreciated that. He waited until I settled into the chair before speaking again. Richard sent me copies of everything. I placed my own folder on his desk. I brought the originals he gave me. And something else. I removed David's trust documents, then the letter. Michael's eyebrows lifted slightly. I wasn't aware of these. I wasn't either. He carefully opened the trust folder. For nearly 15 minutes, he read in complete silence. I watched his face instead of the papers. His expression never became shocked, only increasingly focused. Finally, he leaned back. "Mrs. Johnson, I have some very good news." I hadn't expected those words. "What kind of good news?" "Your late husband was an exceptionally careful man." I smiled sadly. "Yes, he was." Michael tapped the trust agreement. "This document changes almost everything." "How?" "The forged quitclaim deed cannot legally override this trust." Relief washed over me. "So they can't take my house, not through the method they've prepared." "What about the guardianship petition?" Michael folded his hands. "Much more difficult than they probably realize." He pointed to another section. "David anticipated that possibility. I read that." "So did I." He nodded approvingly. "The requirement for 2 independent medical evaluations is extremely strong. So Ethan can't simply tell a judge I'm confused." Michael almost smiled. "Anyone can tell a judge anything. The question is whether they can prove it. And can they, based on what I've seen? No." I finally took my first full breath in almost 24 hours. Then Michael's expression grew serious again. "However," that word stopped me. "However, attempting something and succeeding are 2 different things." I frowned. "They can still try." "Exactly." He stood and walked toward a whiteboard mounted beside the window. Taking a marker, he wrote 3 words: evidence, timing, patience. Then he turned back toward me. "Most clients want immediate confrontation. I don't." That surprised even me. "I want the truth." Michael nodded slowly. "Good. Because immediate confrontation would be a mistake. Why, think about it." He leaned against the desk. "If Ethan believes you've discovered the plan, he'll destroy evidence. Olivia will do the same. The notary may suddenly forget conversations. Witnesses disappear. Electronic records vanish." Every sentence made perfect sense. "So what do? We let them believe their plan is still working." The idea made me uncomfortable. "You want me to pretend?" "I want you to observe." He returned to his chair. "People preparing fraud usually become impatient. They begin revealing more than they intended." He slid a legal pad toward me. "From today forward, I want you to document everything. Phone calls, texts, emails, unexpected visits, every conversation. No matter how small." I nodded. "I can do that." "I know." He smiled slightly. "Teachers are excellent record keepers." That almost made me laugh. Almost. Then I remembered the flash drive. "I haven't watched this yet." I placed it on his desk. Richard said it contained the investigator's findings. Michael inserted it into his computer. Several folders appeared. Photographs, public records, timelines, video files. The first video opened. A fixed security camera overlooked the entrance to an office building. Date, time, everything clearly displayed. At 2:14 p.m., Olivia entered. 2 minutes later, Ethan followed. Neither looked around. Neither appeared hesitant. At 3:31 p.m., both emerged carrying document folders. The next video showed another visit. Different date, same office, same 2 people. Another meeting, another folder, another timestamp. Then another and another. Michael closed the file. We don't need to watch them all. I believe Richard. So do I. Still. Actually seeing Ethan repeatedly entering that office made denial almost impossible. He wasn't dragged there. He wasn't tricked. He walked through those doors willingly. Michael opened another folder. Phone records, calendar entries, copies of publicly available corporate filings. Everything built one careful timeline. Nothing illegal, nothing sensational, just facts. One after another, like bricks forming a wall. Then Michael stopped at a page I hadn't seen before. This interests me. What is it? A lunch reservation. I looked closer. Ethan, Olivia, Linda Carter, the same notary, all 4 together 6 weeks earlier. They weren't just signing papers, Michael said quietly. They were planning. I stared at the page. The conspiracy was bigger than I'd imagined. Linda hadn't simply introduced Olivia to someone. She'd been sitting at the table. Michael wrote another name on the legal pad, Linda Carter. Then he circled it. We're no longer looking at one dishonest couple. We're looking at coordinated conduct. His phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then looked at me. Speak of the devil. Who is it? He turned the phone around. The caller ID read Ethan Johnson. My heart slammed against my ribs. He's calling you. No. Michael frowned. He's calling you. I looked down. My own phone had begun vibrating inside my purse. I hadn't even heard it. The screen displayed the same name, Ethan. I looked at Michael. What do I do? He answered without hesitation. Answer. My stomach tightened. And remember, he slid the legal pad toward me. From this moment forward, every word matters. I took a slow breath, then pressed the green button. Hi, sweetheart. Ethan's voice sounded warm, comfortable, exactly as it always had. Morning, Mom. I hope I didn't wake you. I looked at Michael. He quietly reached into his desk drawer. Without saying a word, he placed a small digital recorder on the table. Then he pressed one button. The red light came on. Recording. Michael met my eyes and silently mouthed 2 words. Let him talk. Morning, Mom. Ethan's voice sounded so normal that for one dangerous moment, I almost forgot why I was sitting in Michael Reynolds' office. Almost. I hope I didn't wake you, he said. I forced a soft laugh. You know, I've always been an early riser. I figured. There was a brief pause. Then he asked the question I had been expecting. How are you feeling today? Not. How was the drive home? Not. Did you enjoy the party? Just, how are you feeling? Michael quietly wrote something on his legal pad and slid it toward me. Don't volunteer information. I nodded almost imperceptibly. I'm feeling much better, I answered. I'm glad. I was worried about you. Worried? You left pretty suddenly. I told you I had a headache. I know. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. His concern sounded genuine. That was the hardest part. If he had sounded cruel, this would have been easier. Instead, he sounded exactly like the son I had loved my entire life. I appreciate that. Another pause. Then he cleared his throat. Actually, there was something Olivia and I wanted to talk to you about. Of course there was. Michael looked up from his notes. He slowly underlined one word. Listen. I remained silent. Ethan continued. We've been thinking a lot since the engagement party. I have too. He laughed lightly. I guess we're all exhausted. I didn't answer. Silence has a strange effect on people. Most rush to fill it. Ethan was no exception. We've just been talking about your future. There it was again, my future, never my wishes, never my plans, always my future. As people get older, he stopped himself. I mean, you've done so much for everyone. It might be nice if someone started helping you. I stared through Michael's office window. The courthouse stood across the street. People walked by carrying coffee, completely unaware that my own son was laying the foundation for taking away my independence. I've managed pretty well so far. You absolutely have. His answer came too quickly. But that doesn't mean you should have to keep doing everything yourself. Michael wrote again. He is establishing dependency. I felt a chill. Without realizing it, Ethan was following exactly the same pattern described in the documents. Step by step, word by word, he continued. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Have you thought any more about downsizing? I looked at Michael. He simply folded his arms. This answer was mine. No. The silence on Ethan's end lasted just a little longer than before. Not at all. No. I like my house. I know. But it's a lot for one person. I don't think so. You've always loved gardening. I have. But yard work gets harder. I hired a landscaping service last spring. Another pause. He hadn't expected that answer. What about cleaning? I have a cleaning service every other week. What about repairs? I have contractors. Every objection he raised already had a solution. Finally, he laughed. You've thought of everything. I've had time. His voice became softer. I just don't want you struggling alone. For a moment, those words almost reached my heart. Then I remembered the surveillance photographs, the forged signature, the guardianship petition. No, I couldn't afford sentiment. Not anymore. I appreciate your concern. I really do. But I'm happy where I am. Another silence, longer this time. Then Ethan changed direction. Actually, I was wondering if I could stop by this afternoon. Michael looked directly at me, very slightly. He nodded. Of course. I'd love to see you. Relief entered Ethan's voice. Great. I'll bring Olivia. Interesting, not I'll come. I'll bring Olivia together. Always together. What time? Maybe around 3. That works. Perfect. Then came the sentence that made Michael quietly reach for another notepad. Oh, I'll bring a couple of papers. Papers. Nothing complicated, he laughed. You know me. Just some basic planning stuff. Planning, the exact word Richard had warned me about. What kind of planning? Oh, just organizing things. You've always told me how important organization is. I suppose I have. We've been meeting with someone who helps families prepare for the future. Meeting with someone. He still wasn't saying attorney or estate planner or notary, just someone. What kind of future? You know, if something ever happened. I'd hate for everything to become stressful. Michael slowly circled 3 words on his pad. He's introducing documents. I kept my breathing steady. Well, I'll look at whatever you bring. Another pause. Then Ethan sounded almost relieved. Really? Sure. I'll read anything before I sign it. The silence that followed was unmistakable. Barely 2 seconds, but enough. Enough for Michael to raise one eyebrow. I mean, Ethan corrected himself. There's probably nothing that even needs signing today. Just information. Of course. We'll see. He quickly changed the subject. So, how did you like Olivia's parents? They seem very nice. That answer was true. Especially Richard. I'm glad. I think both families are going to become very close. Families. The irony almost made me sick. We ended the call a minute later. The moment I pressed end, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Michael reached over, stopped the recorder, then leaned back in his chair. Well, I looked at him. Was that as bad as I think? It was worse. My stomach tightened. Worse, he nodded. Because he's comfortable. I don't understand. If Ethan believed you were suspicious, he would never have mentioned paperwork. He'd wait. He'd become cautious. Michael tapped the recorder. Instead, he volunteered the information. He believes you're exactly where he wants you. The realization sent another wave of sadness through me. My own son thought I was vulnerable, predictable, easy to manipulate. Michael stood and walked toward the whiteboard again. He crossed out one word, timing, then wrote another beneath it, opportunity. They're moving faster than Richard expected. Why? Because the engagement party succeeded. What do you mean? They publicly introduced the narrative. He pointed toward me. Everyone now believes Ethan is the devoted son, and I'm the aging mother. Exactly. So the next step becomes easier. I remembered the applause, the smiles, the guests congratulating Ethan, the women discussing retirement communities. Every conversation had been preparing witnesses. Michael nodded as though reading my thoughts. They're creating a believable story, and believable stories often become dangerous. He sat back down. So, what happens at 3 o'clock? I looked at him. I let them come. Good. I listen. Good. I don't accuse anyone. Excellent. I don't sign anything. His expression finally softened. Perfect. He opened another drawer. This time he removed a slim black case. Inside was something no larger than a deck of cards. What is that? A digital recorder? I already have one on my phone. This one records much longer. He handed it to me. It activates with one switch. Completely legal. In Georgia, he smiled slightly, as long as one party to the conversation consents. You are that party. I slipped the recorder into my purse. Then Michael handed me something else, a business card. On the back, he had written a cell phone number. My direct line, day or night. If anything changes, you call me before you respond. I tucked it carefully beside David's letter. As I stood to leave, Michael spoke one final sentence. Mrs. Johnson. I turned. In 30 years of practicing estate law, I've represented many victims, but very few walked into my office already holding the evidence. He looked at the folder in my hands. You have something your son doesn't know exists. The truth, I nodded. Then left his office. The afternoon sun felt warmer than it had that morning, but as I drove toward my house, one thought refused to leave me. In less than 3 hours, Ethan and Olivia would be sitting across my kitchen table. They believed they were coming to convince a trusting mother to sign away her future. They had no idea. The woman waiting for them wasn't the same Patricia Johnson who had walked into that engagement party 2 nights earlier. And for the first time since Richard slipped that envelope into my hand, I wasn't afraid of what they might say. I was curious, because sometimes the quickest way to expose a lie is to let the liar believe you've believed every word. The drive home from Michael Reynolds' office felt strangely peaceful, not because my problems had disappeared. They hadn't. If anything, they had become more real. But fear had slowly given way to clarity. For nearly 24 hours, I had been reacting. Now, I had a plan. I pulled into my driveway a little after 1 in the afternoon. The little brick house looked exactly as it always had. The flower beds were full of blooming hydrangeas. The wind chime David bought during a trip to Charleston swayed gently beneath the porch roof. A pair of bluebirds landed near the bird feeder. Everything looked ordinary. That made the truth even harder to accept. How could a place filled with so many beautiful memories become the center of so much uncertainty? I unlocked the front door. Before doing anything else, I walked slowly through every room: the living room, the kitchen, David's study, the guest bedroom. Not because I expected to find something new, because I needed to remind myself what I was protecting. This wasn't just a house, it was 34 years of my life. Every wall held a memory. The pencil marks inside the pantry door where I had measured Ethan's height every birthday. The small stain on the dining room floor from the Thanksgiving. Ethan dropped an entire bowl of cranberry sauce when he was 9. The fireplace David built with his own hands one autumn weekend. None of those memories appeared on legal documents, yet they were worth more than anything written on paper. I checked the clock. 1:35 p.m., less than 90 minutes until Ethan and Olivia arrived. I carried Michael's recorder into the kitchen. Following his instructions, I tested it twice. The tiny red light blinked. The audio played back clearly. I slipped it inside a decorative wooden recipe box that sat in the middle of my kitchen table. From the outside, nothing looked unusual. The recorder remained completely hidden. Then I prepared coffee. Not because I expected anyone to drink much of it, because serving coffee was something I had always done when Ethan came home. If today became difficult, I wanted my routine to remain familiar. I refused to let them see panic. At exactly 2:56 p.m., a black luxury SUV pulled into my driveway, right on time. I watched through the front window. Ethan climbed out carrying a leather portfolio. Olivia stepped out from the passenger side. She carried a bakery box, probably pastries, normal, friendly, thoughtful. Everything about their appearance suggested a casual family visit. I opened the door before they knocked. "There you are," Ethan said with an easy smile. He leaned forward and hugged me. Again, it was brief, comfortable, but somehow measured. Olivia handed me the bakery box. "I remembered how much you liked lemon pound cake. That was kind of you." She smiled. "I know you've had a stressful couple of days." Interesting. Not headache. Not feeling sick. Stressful. How did she know I had been stressed? Had Ethan told her? Or had they assumed the engagement party had stirred emotions? I stepped aside. "Come in." The three of us walked into the kitchen. Ethan immediately placed the leather portfolio beside his chair. Not on the counter, not by the door. Beside him. Ready. I quietly noticed, then pretended not to. I poured coffee for everyone. We chatted about harmless things, the engagement decorations, the weather, traffic leaving Atlanta. Almost 20 minutes passed before Ethan finally looked at Olivia. She gave him a tiny nod, so small that I might have missed it 2 days earlier. Now, I saw everything. Ethan cleared his throat. "So, I wanted to talk about something." I smiled. I guessed as much. He laughed. "You know me too well." Maybe I did. Maybe I never had. He opened the leather portfolio. Several neatly organized folders appeared inside, color-coded tabs, professional labels. He slid one folder toward me. "This isn't anything urgent. I just thought we could start getting organized." The word again. Organized. I looked down at the cover. Family planning information. No law firm's logo, no attorney's name, nothing alarming, just an innocent title. I opened it. Inside were brochures, articles, information about retirement planning, estate organization, healthcare directives. Everything appeared perfectly reasonable, almost reassuring. I looked back at Ethan. "This seems helpful?" "It is." Olivia leaned forward. "We've been learning a lot lately. I didn't realize there was so much families should prepare." Her voice sounded warm, natural, completely believable. If I hadn't seen Richard's envelope, I probably would have agreed. Ethan pointed to one brochure. "It talks about making things easier before emergencies happen. I've always believed in planning ahead. So have I." He smiled. "I guess I learned that from you." I almost believed him. Then he carefully removed another folder. Unlike the brochures, this one was plain white. No title, no label. "This one." He smiled casually. "Just some sample forms." Sample. Another harmless word. I opened the folder. There were several pages. One discussed emergency contact information. Another explained medical preferences. Nothing inappropriate, nothing alarming. At least, not yet. I turned another page. Limited financial authorization. Another. Property information worksheet. Still nothing requiring immediate concern. Michael had predicted this. Introduce harmless documents first, build comfort, then move gradually. Ethan watched my expression carefully. "What do you think?" "I think people should understand anything before signing it." His smile froze for the briefest moment. "Absolutely." I couldn't agree more. Olivia quickly added, "That's why we're starting early. No pressure. No deadlines. Just conversation." Very clever, I nodded. "I appreciate that." Then I deliberately placed the papers back on the table without picking up a pen. The silence lasted several seconds. Ethan finally broke it. "There is one other thing. Here it comes." He reached into the portfolio again. This time he removed a single sheet. He didn't slide it toward me immediately. Instead, he kept one hand resting lightly on it. "As you know, our house is a little smaller." I nodded. "And yours has more space than you really need." I remained quiet. He continued. We were wondering if maybe sometime after the wedding, we could help you think about different living arrangements. There it was. Not move, think. Different living arrangements, exactly the kind of gentle language Michael had expected. I smiled softly. What kind of arrangements? Ethan relaxed slightly. As long as you're happy, that's all that matters. But there are some beautiful communities closer to us. Olivia reached over and touched his arm. You'd never be alone. We could see you all the time. I looked at both of them. Their expressions appeared sincere, almost loving. I finally understood why Richard had waited until he had evidence. Without it, no one would ever believe what I suspected, because on the surface, nothing they said sounded cruel. Everything sounded caring, helpful, responsible. I folded my hands together. I'm curious, Ethan smiled. About what? When did the two of you first start discussing my future? The question caught them off guard. Neither answered immediately. Olivia spoke first. Oh, I don't know. A while ago. Before the engagement. She looked toward Ethan. Maybe. Ethan nodded. We've talked about it off and on. I see. I smiled politely. And why did you think I needed help? The room became noticeably quieter. Outside, the wind chime rang softly beneath the porch. Inside. Neither of them seemed quite sure how to answer. And for the first time since they arrived, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. They weren't leading the conversation anymore. I was. For a few long seconds, neither Ethan nor Olivia answered my question. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was revealing. Ethan picked up his coffee. He took a slow sip, buying time. Olivia straightened one corner of the folder on the table. Another delay. Finally, Ethan smiled. You don't need help, Mom. His tone was gentle. We're just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead, I repeated. Exactly. I nodded slowly. So what made you think now was the right time to start? He shrugged. I guess life changes. You've retired. We're getting married. It just seemed responsible. Responsible. Another carefully chosen word. I looked down at the papers. They're certainly organized. I knew you'd appreciate that. He smiled again. You always taught me to prepare instead of panic. I did. And I've never forgotten it. There it was again. The son I had raised. The boy who remembered my lessons. The man sitting across from me. Sometimes they felt like the same person. Sometimes they felt like strangers sharing one face. I picked up one of the brochures. This retirement community, it looks beautiful. Olivia brightened immediately. It really is. We toured it. You toured it. Just to gather information. She laughed lightly. No commitments. I looked at Ethan. You toured retirement communities before asking whether I wanted to leave my home. His smile faded just a little. We were only trying to be prepared. I understand. I folded the brochure closed. I've just never mentioned wanting to move. No, you haven't. He leaned forward. But you've mentioned feeling lonely. I've also mentioned enjoying my book club. He nodded. You have. You've mentioned gardening. Yes. You've mentioned church. Yes. You've mentioned volunteering. Yes. I smiled. So why focus on the lonely part? Neither of them answered immediately. Olivia finally spoke. Because we worry. I appreciate that. I really do. I let my voice remain warm. But worrying about someone and making decisions for them aren't always the same thing. The room became quiet again. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the street. Inside my kitchen, every small sound suddenly seemed louder. The ticking wall clock, the refrigerator cycling on, the faint tapping of Olivia's fingernail against her coffee cup. Ethan tried again. Mom, we just don't want something to happen unexpectedly. What kind of something? You know, a fall, an illness, anything. I nodded thoughtfully. I have long-term care insurance. His eyebrows lifted. You do? Your father insisted. I also have excellent health insurance. Another pause. And my neighbors check on me. So does my church. I have emergency contacts. I've already completed my medical directives. Every answer quietly removed another reason they had prepared. Ethan's shoulders became slightly tense. I noticed So did Olivia. She quickly shifted the conversation. Patricia, can I ask something? Of course. Have you ever thought about simplifying your finances? There it was. Not directly about the house. Not yet. Finances. I smiled politely. What do you mean by simplifying, having someone help organize things? I already have help. You do. My accountant, my financial advisor, my attorney. That last word changed the room. Not dramatically, just enough. Ethan looked up. Attorney? Yes. I've had one for years. That wasn't entirely true. Michael Reynolds hadn't been my attorney for years. But David and I had always maintained legal counsel. The statement was close enough to the truth. What does he help with? Estate matters. Planning. Updating documents. Olivia's smile disappeared for the briefest moment. I didn't realize. I suppose I never mentioned it. The three of us sat quietly. Then Ethan laughed. Well, that's probably smarter than trying to figure everything out alone. I agree. His eyes drifted toward the white folder still lying unopened on the table. He hadn't forgotten it. Neither had I. He reached for it again. There is one form I'd actually like your opinion on. My opinion? You've always been better at reading complicated documents than I am. That almost made me smile. It was believable. Very believable. He slid the paper toward me. This is only a sample. No pressure. I'd just like to know if the wording makes sense. I looked down. The title read Property Information Summary. Nothing alarming, at least not immediately. The first page asked ordinary questions. Primary residence, insurance company, mortgage lender, emergency contacts. I continued reading. Halfway down the second page, something caught my attention. A small paragraph, easy to overlook. It authorized the named representative to communicate with financial institutions regarding the listed property. No ownership transfer, no deed, nothing dramatic, but it quietly established access. I looked up. This is interesting. Ethan smiled. What do you think? I think most people would skip this paragraph. I tapped the section gently. The authorization, yes, it seems practical. It could be. I met his eyes. But it could also give someone access to information they didn't previously have. His smile froze, only for a heartbeat. Then it returned. I hadn't thought of that. I figured you would. I closed the folder. I'd probably have an attorney review something like this. Olivia shifted in her chair. Even something so simple. Especially something simple, I smiled kindly. Your father used to say that important details usually hide in ordinary language. That part was true. David had said it hundreds of times. Ethan nodded slowly. I guess that's why lawyers stay in business. I suppose so. Another long silence followed. This time Ethan looked genuinely frustrated. Not angry, frustrated, as though the conversation wasn't moving where he expected. He stood, walked toward the kitchen window, looked out across the backyard. You've really kept the garden beautiful. I enjoy it. I know. He turned back toward me. It's just, he hesitated. I don't want you doing everything forever. His voice sounded softer now, less rehearsed, more personal, for the first time all afternoon. I believed he was speaking honestly, not about the paperwork, about his fear. I studied his face. He looked tired, older than 38, maybe carrying burdens I couldn't yet see. Maybe convincing himself this plan truly was helping me. Or maybe convincing himself because the alternative was admitting what he'd become. Either way, I wasn't ready to decide. Ethan, he looked at me. Do you know what your father told me the year before he died? He shook his head. He said growing older doesn't mean giving up your right to make your own decisions. The room fell silent. He also said, I paused, the people who love you should offer help, not take away your choices. Ethan looked down. His expression became difficult to read. Olivia quickly stepped in. We're not trying to take away your choices. I hope not, I answered gently, because I still intend to make them. Nobody spoke. Finally, Ethan gathered the folders back into his portfolio. No rush. He forced another smile. We can always talk another time. I'd like that. He closed the portfolio, then surprised me. He walked around the table, bent down, and hugged me. This hug lasted longer than the others, long enough that I could hear his heartbeat. Long enough to remember the little boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after long car rides. Then he whispered something so quietly that only I could hear. "I just want everything to work out." When he stepped back, I searched his face. Was that guilt, fear, hope? I honestly couldn't tell anymore. After they left, I stood at the front window until their SUV disappeared around the corner. Only then did I return to the kitchen. I opened the recipe box. The recorder's tiny red light had stopped blinking. Every word, every pause, every carefully chosen phrase, it had captured them all. I picked it up carefully, then reached for my phone. There was only one person I wanted to call: Michael Reynolds. Because the conversation hadn't proven anyone had done anything illegal, but it had confirmed something equally important. Ethan and Olivia weren't improvising. They were following a plan. And now, for the first time, that plan had begun to unravel. I didn't call Michael immediately. Instead, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The coffee cups were still half full. Olivia had barely touched hers. Ethan's cup sat exactly where he'd left it, a faint ring of coffee staining the coaster beneath. The folders were gone. The smiles were gone. But something else remained. Silence. The kind that follows a storm before anyone realizes the weather has changed. I picked up the recorder. For a long moment, I simply held it. Then I pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the kitchen. "We've been thinking about your future," Olivia followed. "We just worry about you." Each sentence sounded gentle, reasonable, caring. If I hadn't known the context, if I hadn't seen Richard's envelope, if I hadn't read David's trust documents, I would have believed every word. That realization frightened me more than the conversation itself. Manipulation rarely sounds cruel. It often sounds compassionate. It offers help. It promises relief. It wraps control in kindness. I stopped the recording halfway through. I didn't need to hear the rest. Not yet. Instead, I reached for my phone and called Michael. He answered almost immediately. "Mrs. Johnson." "How did it go?" They came. "As expected. Almost exactly. Can you come by tomorrow morning?" "I'd rather come today." He didn't hesitate. "I'll wait for you." An hour later, I was back in his office. This time, I didn't feel like a frightened client. I felt like someone carrying pieces of a puzzle. Michael listened without interrupting as I described every detail. The coffee, the brochures, the questions, the careful language. When I finished, I handed him the recorder. "I'd like you to hear it yourself." He plugged in a headset. For nearly 30 minutes, he listened in complete silence. Occasionally, he paused, rewound a few seconds, made notes, then continued. When the recording ended, he removed the headphones and leaned back. "They're disciplined," I nodded. I thought the same. They avoided direct statements. They avoided pressure. They never asked you to sign anything. "Not today." "Exactly." He folded his hands. "They're moving carefully." I frowned. "Does that mean the recording isn't useful?" "Oh, it's useful. Just not for the reason you think." He turned the recorder toward me. "This conversation shows a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "They're introducing ideas gradually." He reached for his legal pad. On one page, he wrote public narrative. Underneath it, loving son, concerned future daughter-in-law, helpful planning mother's future. Then he flipped to another page. Private progression retirement discussions, financial organization, property information, future paperwork. He looked at me, individually. None of these conversations are alarming. Together, they establish a progression. I understood. They're creating normality. Exactly. Michael tapped the pad. If this ever became a dispute, this recording demonstrates they had already begun steering conversations toward your finances and living arrangements. He smiled slightly. And you consistently stated that you wished to remain independent. That part hadn't occurred to me. So it helps. It helps establish your intentions. He stood and walked toward a filing cabinet. When he returned, he carried a thick blue folder. "I've already started preparing something." He opened it. Across the first page, I read, Patricia Johnson Estate Protection File. Seeing my own name printed there made everything feel unexpectedly official. What is all this? A precaution. Inside were neatly organized sections: timeline, documents, witnesses, communication log, medical information, trust records. Michael pointed to the first divider. From now on, everything goes here. Phone calls, emails, letters, even handwritten notes, I nodded. I've kept journals for years. Excellent. Don't stop. He closed the folder. There's one more thing I'd like to recommend. What? I'd like you to schedule a routine physical. I blinked. I'm not sick. I know. Then why? Because if anyone ever questions your ability to manage your affairs, it helps to have recent medical documentation. That made perfect sense. I'll call my doctor tomorrow. Good. He made another note. Don't tell Ethan. I wasn't planning to. As I prepared to leave, Michael asked a question I hadn't expected. Mrs. Johnson, when was the last time you looked at your will? I hesitated. Honestly, probably 5 years. I updated beneficiaries after my sister passed away. But that's about it. I'd like to review it. Today. If you have a copy. I do. It stays in David's study. He nodded. Bring it next time. I paused. Michael, may I ask you something? Of course. He waited patiently. Do you think my son loves me? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he removed his glasses and placed them on the desk. I've practiced law for a long time. I've learned not to confuse love with judgment. I listened quietly. I've represented people who genuinely loved their parents and still made terrible decisions. I've represented parents who adored their children and still needed legal protection from them. He leaned forward. The law doesn't measure love. It measures actions. His words settled deeply inside me because I had spent 2 days asking the wrong question. Not, does Ethan love me, but what is Ethan choosing to do? Those were different questions, very different. Driving home again, I thought about Michael's answer. Love, actions, choices. Maybe Ethan did love me. Maybe he had convinced himself that controlling my future was somehow protecting it. Or maybe he had simply become comfortable crossing lines one small step at a time. Either way, intentions no longer mattered as much as behavior. When I pulled into my driveway, another surprise was waiting. A white SUV sat across the street, not directly in front of my house, just far enough away to appear ordinary. A man sat inside, reading something. I parked slowly. He never looked up. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe it was nothing. I went inside, closed the curtains. 5 minutes later, I glanced outside again. The SUV was still there. The man still hadn't moved. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. Not panic, awareness. Richard's envelope had included photographs of me outside this very house. Photographs taken from across the street. I wasn't about to jump to conclusions, but I also wasn't going to ignore what I saw. I quietly picked up my phone. Not to call the police. Not yet. Instead, I took 2 photographs through the edge of the curtain. One showing the SUV, another capturing its license plate. Then I wrote the date and time in my notebook, exactly as Michael had instructed. No assumptions, just facts. At 5:42 p.m., the SUV drove away. Perhaps it had been completely innocent. Perhaps not. Either way, I now understood something I had never fully appreciated before. Paying attention wasn't the same as living in fear. It was simply refusing to overlook details. That evening, I carried David's letter into the living room. I read the final paragraph once more. If people worthy of your trust stand beside you, be grateful. If they do not stand anyway. I smiled sadly. I think you'd like Richard, I whispered toward the empty room. Then I folded the letter carefully, placed it back inside its envelope. And for the first time since the engagement party, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. David had left me wisdom. Richard had brought me evidence. Michael had given me a strategy. Now all I needed was the patience to let the truth reveal itself completely. 3 days passed, then another 4. Life settled into something that almost resembled normal again. Almost. Every morning, I watered my flowers. Every Tuesday, I volunteered at the public library. Every Thursday evening, I attended my book club. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. I no longer answered Ethan's calls without first taking a slow breath. I no longer opened unexpected mail without paying attention to every page. I no longer assumed that good intentions explained every uncomfortable feeling. Awareness had quietly become part of my routine. It wasn't exhausting. It was strangely freeing. One Tuesday morning, I kept my appointment with my primary care physician, Dr. Susan Miller. She'd been my doctor for nearly 12 years. After the examination, she smiled as she reviewed my chart. "Patricia, your blood pressure looks excellent. I've been trying to walk every day. It shows." She continued reading. "Memory seems perfectly normal." I smiled. "I certainly hope so." She laughed. "You remembered every medication, every appointment, and corrected me when I mixed up the date of your last bone density scan. I suppose that's a good sign." "It certainly is." I hesitated. "There is something I'd like to ask." "Anything." "I'd like copies of today's evaluation." She looked at me with mild curiosity. "Planning ahead." "Something like that." Without asking intrusive questions, she nodded. "I'll include a summary confirming that you're fully capable of managing your own medical decisions." Exactly what Michael had recommended. Another small piece of protection. Another quiet step. The following afternoon, I met Michael again. This time, I brought everything. My updated medical evaluation, David's original will, the trust documents, a notebook containing every conversation since the engagement party. Michael spent nearly an hour reviewing everything. Finally, he looked up. "I think it's time." "Time for what?" "To strengthen your existing plan." He opened my trust agreement. "Your husband built an excellent foundation. We're simply going to reinforce it." He explained each recommendation carefully. None of them were dramatic. None of them punished Ethan. Instead, they focused on protecting me. We updated emergency contacts, reviewed healthcare directives, confirmed successor trustees, verified property records. Every decision remained mine. Every signature was witnessed properly. Every document was explained before I signed it. The contrast with the mysterious paperwork Ethan had brought me couldn't have been clearer. Michael slid the final document across the desk. "Read every page." "I intend to," he smiled. I never doubted that. Nearly 45 minutes later, I placed my signature at the bottom, not because anyone rushed me, because I understood every word. Michael organized the completed papers into a new binder. Across the spine, a simple label read, "Johnson Family Trust Updated." He handed it to me. "Keep this somewhere secure." "I will." Then his expression became more serious. "There is one more recommendation." I waited. "I think you should consider changing access to your financial accounts." "You mean passwords?" "Passwords. Online banking. Safe deposit records. Emergency contacts? Nothing drastic. Just review who currently has information." I thought about it. Years ago, when Ethan was in college, I had added him as an emergency contact to several accounts. Not because I expected problems, because he was my only child. "I'll review everything." "Good." That Friday, I visited my local bank. The branch manager, Karen Whitfield, had known me for years. She greeted me with her usual warm smile. "Patricia, what brings you in today?" "I'd like to review my account security." "Certainly." We sat together in her office. Karen patiently explained every option: additional verification, fraud alerts, contact preferences, temporary transaction notifications. I activated nearly all of them. She never asked why, only whether I felt comfortable with each choice. Before I left, she said something unexpected. "I wish more people did this before there was a problem." I smiled. "So do I." The next surprise came that weekend. Ethan called Saturday morning. His voice sounded different, less confident. "Mom, hi, sweetheart. I was wondering..." He paused. "Could we have lunch? Just the two of us." I looked out the kitchen window. The roses were beginning to bloom. "Of course. Tomorrow." "That works." He sounded relieved. "Thank you." "No, Olivia." The silence lasted just long enough to answer the question. No, just us. Sunday arrived bright and warm. We met at a small family restaurant halfway between our homes. Not fancy, not crowded, just quiet enough to talk. When Ethan walked in, I noticed something immediately. He looked tired. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. He hugged me, longer than usual. "I'm glad you came." "So am I." We ordered lunch. For several minutes, neither of us mentioned anything important. We talked about baseball, the weather, a neighbor who had recently retired. Then Ethan set his fork down. "Mom, I owe you an apology." My heart tightened. "For what?" "I've been busy. Too busy. I know I've pulled away." I studied his face carefully. This wasn't rehearsed. At least, it didn't feel rehearsed. "I've missed you." He looked down. "I've missed you too." The words sounded sincere, painfully sincere. Then he added something unexpected. "I don't think I've been a very good son lately." I stayed quiet. He continued. "Work. The wedding. Everything. I let it become an excuse." For a brief moment, I saw the little boy again. Not the confident financial consultant, not the man carrying folders into my kitchen. Just my son. The temptation to forgive everything all at once almost overwhelmed me. Almost. Then David's words returned. "Do not confuse sacrifice with surrender. Love, yes. Blindness, no." I reached across the table and gently touched Ethan's hand. "I've missed you too." His eyes became watery. "I want us to be close again." "So do I." That much was true. Very true. Then he asked the question I had quietly expected. "Do you think we've gotten off on the wrong foot with all that planning stuff?" Planning stuff. Interesting choice of words. I smiled gently. "I think we simply see some things differently." He nodded slowly. "I never wanted you to think I was trying to control your life." I looked directly into his eyes. "I appreciate hearing you say that." He relaxed slightly, then he smiled. "I guess we can leave all those conversations for another time." Another time. Not never. Another time. I noticed. I always notice now. Lunch ended warmly. We hugged goodbye. As I watched Ethan drive away, tears filled my eyes. Not because I believed everything was fixed, because healing had become far more complicated than choosing between love and betrayal. I still loved my son. Nothing could erase 38 years of memories. But love no longer required me to ignore warning signs. That evening, I wrote one final entry in my notebook before bed. Today, Ethan apologized for becoming distant. He did not mention the property documents. He did not ask me to sign anything. He said those conversations could wait until another time. Then underneath those observations, I wrote something else. Not as evidence, not for Michael, for myself. People can deserve compassion without being given complete trust. As I closed the notebook, my phone vibrated on the bedside demo. A new text message had arrived. It wasn't from Ethan. It wasn't from Michael. It was from Richard Carter. Only one sentence. "I need to see you tomorrow. Something has changed." I read Richard's message 3 times before responding. "I need to see you tomorrow. Something has changed." No explanation, no details, just those 7 words. After everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks, I had learned not to let my imagination race ahead of the facts. So I replied with only one sentence. "Tell me where and what time." His answer came almost immediately. 9 o'clock, Magnolia Cafe. Please come alone. The next morning, I arrived 15 minutes early. The Magnolia Cafe sat on a quiet corner a few miles from downtown Savannah. It wasn't the kind of place where business deals happened. It was the kind of place where retired couples shared breakfast and neighbors greeted one another by name. Richard was already there. He looked older than I remembered from the engagement party, not physically, emotionally. There was a heaviness around him that hadn't been there before. He stood as I approached. "Thank you for coming." "Of course." After we ordered coffee, neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Richard folded his hands on the table. "I owe you another apology." "You've already apologized." "Not enough." His voice was quieter than usual. I kept hoping I could solve this inside my own family. I waited. I was wrong. What changed? Richard sighed. I confronted Olivia again. That surprised me. You told me you weren't going to. I wasn't. He stared into his coffee. But after the engagement party, I couldn't keep pretending. What happened? His expression became deeply sad. She admitted something. My heartbeat quickened. What did she admit? Not what you might think. He chose his words carefully. She admitted she and Ethan had been making plans for your future without including you. I nodded slowly. I already suspected that. So did I. He continued. But she insisted they believed they were helping. Helping. That word again. Richard gave a tired smile. She actually said, Patricia will thank us one day. I looked out the cafe window. How many harmful decisions in history had begun with someone believing they knew what was best for another person? Richard continued. I asked whether you had ever requested help. No. I asked whether you had ever said you wanted to leave your home. No. I asked whether she understood the difference between offering support and making plans for someone else's life. He paused. She didn't answer. Our coffee arrived. Neither of us touched it. There was something else, Richard said. What? I asked Olivia whether she had shown you every document she'd been discussing. I looked back at him, and she admitted there were drafts. Drafts, not final documents, not filed papers. Drafts, it was an important distinction. Richard noticed my expression. I know that doesn't erase your concerns. It doesn't, but I want to be completely accurate. I appreciated that. Accuracy mattered, especially now. She also admitted, he hesitated, that she and Ethan had started planning long before speaking with you. That part hurt. Not because I didn't already know, because hearing it confirmed by her own father made it impossible to dismiss. Richard leaned back. I've spent days asking myself where I failed as a father. You didn't create every decision she made. No, but perhaps I overlooked things. His voice carried genuine regret. We all overlook things. I thought of Ethan, of baseball games, graduation, Christmas mornings, the countless moments I had believed love alone could solve every problem. Maybe parents weren't meant to see every flaw. Maybe that was why boundaries mattered. Not because love was weak, because love could be blind. After breakfast, Richard walked me to my car. Before we said goodbye, he handed me a small envelope. Immediately, my heart skipped. He noticed. This one's much less dramatic. I laughed softly for the first time in days. I hope so. Inside was a handwritten note, not evidence, not legal papers, just a letter. I thought you should have it. From who? Me. I waited until I got home before reading it. The letter was only 2 pages long. In it, Richard wrote about his years investigating financial crimes, about the families he had watched fall apart, about adult children who sincerely believed they deserved to make decisions for aging parents. One paragraph stayed with me. The greatest mistake I saw wasn't always greed. Sometimes it was certainty. People became convinced they knew what was best for someone else, and little by little, they stopped asking permission. I read those words twice, then a third time. Maybe that was the tragedy. Not simply money, not simply property. The belief that another person's independence had become negotiable. That afternoon, Ethan called again. His voice sounded lighter than it had at lunch. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. I wanted to ask you something. Go ahead. Would you come by the house next weekend? The new house. Well, he laughed. It'll be our house after the wedding. I'd like to show you around. I hesitated only briefly. I'd like that. And he paused. I've been thinking. About what? I don't want us arguing over planning anymore. Neither did I. I think we should slow down. Those words caught me by surprise. Slow down? Yeah. We've probably tried to solve too much at once. I smiled to myself. Perhaps someone had been doing some thinking. I think that's a good idea. I'd rather spend time with my mom than talk about paperwork. For the first time in weeks, I believed him, at least in that moment. I'd like that too. Later that evening, I met with Michael Reynolds one final time before the wedding. I told him everything. Lunch with Ethan, breakfast with Richard, the conversations, the change in tone. Michael listened carefully. When I finished, he smiled. "You've done something very difficult." "What?" "You refuse to let fear make your decisions." "I've certainly felt plenty of fear." "I know, but you didn't react impulsively." He closed the Johnson family trust binder. "You gathered information. You protected yourself. You kept communicating. That's much harder than most people realize." I thought about everything that had happened. The engagement party, the envelope, the sleepless nights, David's letter, Richard's honesty, Michael's guidance. "I don't know what happens next." Michael nodded. "Neither do I. And that's okay." I looked at him curiously. "It is. We're attorneys. We prepare for possibilities. We don't predict people." He stood and offered his hand. "Whatever relationship you eventually have with Ethan, I hope it's built on honesty. So do I. And if difficult conversations continue, you now have something you didn't have before." "What's that?" He smiled. "Confidence that your voice matters." Driving home, I realized something had quietly changed inside me. When this began, I believed I had only two choices: trust blindly or lose my son forever. Now I understood there was another path: love him, listen carefully, protect myself, and refuse to surrender my independence in exchange for peace. That wasn't revenge. It was self-respect. And sometimes, self-respect is the quietest form of justice. As I turned onto my street, the familiar porch light came into view. David had once told me that home should always feel like the safest place in the world. For the first time since Richard had slipped that envelope into my hand, it finally did again. But deep inside, I also knew something else. The wedding was only 2 weeks away. And before anyone walked down that aisle, there were still truths that needed to be spoken. 2 weeks passed more quickly than I expected. The wedding day arrived beneath a bright Georgia sky. The kind of morning that makes people believe everything will turn out exactly as planned. I stood in my bedroom fastening the pearl necklace David had given me on our 20th anniversary, the same necklace I had worn to the engagement party. Back then, I had walked into a celebration carrying nothing but hope. Today, I carried something much stronger: perspective. I no longer felt frightened. I no longer felt confused. Most importantly, I no longer felt responsible for fixing everything. Some problems cannot be solved by one person. Families heal only when everyone chooses honesty. I had finally accepted that. The ceremony was held in a historic chapel just outside Savannah. It wasn't as extravagant as the engagement party. It was elegant, simple, peaceful. Guests smiled as they found their seats. Soft music filled the room. When I arrived, several people greeted me warmly. One older couple remembered meeting me at the engagement party. "We're so glad you're here," the wife said. "Ethan talks about you all the time." I smiled politely. I appreciate that. This time, those words no longer filled me with uncertainty. People were allowed to believe good things about my son. I wanted them to, because despite everything that had happened, I still hoped he would become the man I knew he could be. Richard spotted me near the entrance. He walked over quietly. "You look wonderful." "So do you," he smiled. "I wasn't sure today would ever come." I wasn't either. We stood together in comfortable silence. Then he said something I will never forget. "Whatever happens after today, thank you." I looked at him. For what? For listening. For asking questions before making accusations. He lowered his voice. "You gave everyone the chance to choose honesty." I thought about that. Perhaps that had been the greatest lesson of all. Truth spoken too early can sound like anger. Truth spoken with patience becomes impossible to ignore. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Ethan looked nervous. Olivia looked radiant. When they exchanged vows, I watched my son's face carefully. He wasn't pretending. He loved her. I believed that. Love had never been the problem. The problem had been boundaries, choices, communication. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause. I clapped too. Not because every wound had healed, because bitterness had no place in that moment. The reception was held in a garden overlooking the river. Flowers covered every table. Children laughed near the fountain. For the first hour, the afternoon passed peacefully. Then Ethan approached me. "Mom, would you walk with me for a minute?" "Of course." We stepped away from the music, past the gardens toward a quiet stone path shaded by oak trees. Neither of us spoke immediately. Finally, Ethan stopped walking. "I've been thinking about Dad." My heart tightened. "So have I." He stared at the ground. I found one of his old letters. I looked at him surprised. "What letter?" "The one he wrote me before I graduated college." I remembered it. David had written Ethan several letters to be opened at different stages of life. I read it again last week. Ethan swallowed hard. He wrote something I never understood until now. "What was it?" Ethan's eyes filled with tears. He said, "The day you begin believing your mother's life belongs to you is the day you stop seeing her as a person." I felt tears rising in my own eyes. I hadn't thought about that letter in years. I hadn't either. He looked directly at me. "I'm sorry." Not the quick apology from the restaurant, not the polite apology of someone trying to end an uncomfortable conversation. This one was different. "I started believing that because I wanted to protect you. I had the right to make decisions for you." His voice broke. "I stopped asking. I started assuming. I convinced myself I knew what was best." He wiped his eyes. And somewhere along the way, I stopped listening. Neither of us spoke. The wind moved gently through the oak trees above us. Finally, I reached for his hand. "Thank you." And he looked confused. "For what?" "For telling me the truth." He shook his head. "I don't deserve your forgiveness yet." I smiled softly. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. It's the decision to stop carrying hatred. I took a slow breath. But trust? Trust grows back one choice at a time. He nodded. "I understand. I hope you do." A few minutes later, Olivia joined us. She looked nervous. "Patricia, I owe you an apology too." I waited. I became so focused on planning the future. I forgot it wasn't my future to plan. Her voice was quiet. "I should have asked. I should have listened. You were right. No amount of concern gives someone permission to make decisions for another adult." I appreciated her honesty, not because it erased the past, because accountability is where healing begins. "I hope we can build something better," she said. "So do I." As the sun began to set, guests gathered for one final toast. To my surprise, Ethan asked for the microphone. "I'd like to say one more thing." The conversations around the garden faded. He looked toward me. "When I was growing up, my mother taught me that respect wasn't something you demanded. It was something you practiced." He smiled sadly. "I've spent the last few weeks realizing I still have a lot to learn." He raised his glass. "To my mother, for reminding me that love without respect isn't enough." Every eye turned toward me. This time, I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel exposed. I simply stood, raised my glass, and smiled. Later that evening, after the guests had begun leaving, Richard walked me to my car. He looked relieved. "I think today ended better than either of us expected." "I think so too." He extended his hand. Instead, I hugged him. "Thank you." He smiled warmly. "No, thank you. If you had ignored that envelope, I probably would have." I laughed softly. "Fortunately, you didn't let me." When I finally arrived home, the porch light was glowing just as it always had. I unlocked the front door, walked inside, and placed David's letter back into the study drawer where it belonged. Beside it, I placed Richard's letter. Two fathers, one protecting his wife, one trying to protect another family from making irreversible mistakes. Then I looked around the quiet house. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. My home was still mine. My independence was still mine. My voice was still mine. And perhaps most importantly, my relationship with my son no longer depended on silence. It depended on honesty. As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I realized something that would stay with me for the rest of my life. The envelope Richard placed in my hand at the engagement party didn't save my house. The The trust documents didn't save my future. The lawyer didn't save my independence. Those things gave me protection. But the decision that truly changed my life was much simpler. I chose not to ignore the quiet voice inside me that whispered something wasn't right. Sometimes courage isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't arrive with dramatic speeches or courtroom victories. Sometimes courage is a widow quietly opening an envelope, reading every page, asking difficult questions, and remembering that love should never require surrendering your dignity. That was the inheritance David truly left me, and it is the one gift no one can ever take away. Every family faces moments that test love, trust, and loyalty. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by strangers, but by the people we would sacrifice everything to protect. Yet this story reminds us that protecting yourself does not mean you love your family any less. Healthy love is built on honesty, respect, and boundaries, not on control, fear, or silent obedience. Patricia's greatest victory was never about keeping her home or protecting her finances. It was about refusing to lose herself. She chose wisdom over anger, patience over revenge, and truth over denial. By asking difficult questions instead of looking away, she preserved not only her independence, but also the possibility of rebuilding her relationship with her son on a foundation of honesty rather than illusion. If this story touched your heart, remember this: your kindness should never require you to surrender your dignity. You can forgive without forgetting. You can love someone while still protecting yourself. And sometimes, the quietest act of courage is simply believing that your voice, your choices, and your life still matter. If you've ever experienced a difficult family situation or had to stand up for yourself, I'd truly love to hear your story. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your experience may encourage someone else who feels alone today. And if stories like this speak to your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next emotional journey together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.